This week's podcast is sponsored by Montclair State University. Located just 12 miles from New York City, Montclair State University is a public research university that's helping students get from where they are now to where they want to be. Nationally ranked for social mobility and Washington Monthly's #1 public institution in New Jersey, Montclair is the state's premier public service institution. Learn more about what makes Montclair a university on the rise at montclair.edu. Hello, and welcome to the Washington Monthly. I'm your host, Ann Kim.
And I'm your co-host, Garrett Epps.
In this episode, a closer look at why elite universities might have no choice but to cut a deal with the Trump administration.
Basically, every part of university budgets is under stress right now.
Our guest is Robert Kelchen, professor at the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and one of the nation's leading experts on higher education finance. Robert is also one of the editors of the Washington Monthly College Guide. Hey, Robert, great to see you. Welcome back.
Glad to be back. I wish things were a little bit calmer.
Yeah, I do too. Well, Robert, when we talked a few months back, Trump at that point had frozen a lot of research funding from NIH and other government agencies that was supposed to be going to colleges. He threatened to withhold visas from foreign students, but it turns out he'd actually just kind of gotten started. And since then, he's actually succeeded in collecting a few Ivy League scalps over the last couple of weeks. Columbia University just agreed to this $200 million settlement. Brown University agreed to a $50 million deal. And now there are rumors that Harvard is going to settle as well, although that figure is very much in dispute. So if you could, why do these schools feel compelled to make these deals? Like, what are the financial realities that might be pushing schools like Harvard and Columbia and Brown to the table with Trump?
Well, the Ivy League institutions have a lot of federal funding from research, and they're hoping to get some of that back to the extent the administration continues any type of research funding in the future. But also there is a divide on campus and among alumni and board members about what to do. There are some people who want to take this all the way to the Supreme Court. Others, especially among faculty in the sciences, who are concerned that this may be the right thing to do to take it through the courts, but this would absolutely devastate their life's work in research. So they're trying to hope that they can salvage their own work by doing a settlement. And I think there are also still some people who think that a modest settlement now will save them money later, because it seems like the administration wants to up the ante with new institutions. So I think all of those reasons really could justify at least thinking about a settlement. But the question is, will you get your money back, and will there be pressure to settle again a few months down the road?
Now say that Harvard does decide to hold out. I mean, how long can Harvard maintain the status quo given its current financial resources and assuming that all the research money, I think it's like $9 billion in research funding that's at stake, plus the loss of international students. They have a $53 billion endowment, but the government has limitless resources.
It's tricky for Harvard to hold out for a long time, especially given that out of their $53 billion endowment, something in the neighborhood of about $10 billion is unrestricted that they can use for anything at any point in time. They can also borrow money from the capital markets to get through. So they could, and that $9 billion of federal funds, some of that is through affiliated hospitals, doesn't go directly to the university. But basically, if they were to try to fight this for years, all of their unrestricted money would go away over the next several years, even after making cuts. And for an institution that wants to keep growing and thriving, it's more difficult to do that without having enough unrestricted funds. So they can do it. The challenge is, are they willing to take that large of a financial hit, or are they trying to save as much of their position as possible, realizing that conditions may be difficult for years to come?
And it's not just Harvard that's in this position, right? And there are a couple larger financial pressures that the Trump administration is instituting on all universities. The first being the endowment tax that was included in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. My understanding is that it increased the percentage that's due to 8%, right, from the 1.4%. And Mark
Yes.
Schneider at the American Enterprise Institute had done this chart that revealed these really stunning figures that universities are going to have to fork over in just the next 5 years. Harvard, I think, has to pay about $2 billion, he estimated, over the next 5 years alone. Yale, 1.5 billion. Even the University of Oklahoma has to pay some of the endowment tax, I think. Notre Dame, $690 million is what he calculated. What do you think the impact of this measure is going to be on the elite schools that are particularly targeted, but schools more broadly?
Yeah. The endowment tax still affects a pretty small slice of American higher education. It's a hit on resources at a time where institutions are having to make some difficult financial decisions. But ultimately, the bigger concern over the next several years may not be an endowment tax of up to 8%, because that tax is only on their income. It
Mm,
could be everything else crazy going on with the economy that could reduce endowment earnings, period. But it's just another area of financial uncertainty where basically every part of university budgets is under stress right now.
yeah. I also want to ask about the international student picture too, because that's another area where Trump seems to be really, turning the screws. There is a new analysis from the Association of International Educators, NAFSA, predicting that international enrollment in U.S. colleges could drop by as much as 150,000 students this fall alone. And that's like a 30 to 40% decline in new international students is what they said. What's the financial impact going to be? And again, this is not just about Harvard. International students are everywhere, right?
Yeah. We have international students here in Tennessee as well. And we're not sure how many students are going to be here in the fall because getting visa appointments has been extremely difficult. We don't really know what's going on with that social media screening that they're doing. And then also, if students have options in multiple countries, are they considering the US? But this is something where this a 1 year drop of 30 to 40% of international students is painful. The big concern comes that if this continues to build over time, and we end up with a permanent 30 to 40% reduction in international students. And then that really starts hitting some institutions' bottom lines and also really affects both undergraduate and graduate education, with international students being a larger share of grad students, and they're also teaching classes while they're here too.
What options do universities have for making up some of this revenue?
The two best options they have are trying to increase fundraising and trying to increase enrollment of American students. And there are signs that some of the big research universities are going deeper into their wait lists this fall to try to get more American students to make up for the expected loss of international students. And then they're in turn taking students from the more regionally focused public and private institutions. So this effect is cascading down the higher education food chain. But given when they're happening at this point in the spring and summer, the ability to adjust is somewhat limited, which means that colleges are going to be taking budget hits this year, and they may be able to adjust a little bit more in the future.
Mm-hmm. And talk a little bit more about this cascading ripple effect. You're talking about the R1s, the big institutions dipping down to wait lists, cannibalizing enrollment from the smaller colleges. And then at the very bottom, we're talking about smaller private colleges and community colleges. Like, who ultimately may go out of business if they can't find enough students to fill their rosters?
Yeah, I'm not sure it trickles all the way down to the smallest private colleges like that, but it very well may. Just because if you lose 5 students, that can be the difference between making full payroll and not. At this point, I'm more concerned this fall about, will financial aid get out to colleges and then students in time? Because if that gets delayed in any way, shape, or form, then we have a raft of small private colleges unable to make payroll because they are living paycheck to paycheck, and their biggest paycheck is when tuition money comes in.
So, all of this is leading me to believe that we should not be surprised if Harvard comes to the table and settles for some amount of money. Principals have to perhaps sacrifice to pragmatism in these kinds of circumstances. Is that what you're expecting from a lot of these schools? Is everyone going to have to come to the table at some point because of all of these pressures you're talking about?
I think they're going to be asked to come to the table, and this is going to go well beyond the Ivies. I could see over the course of the next few years that I could see the administration trying to get money from a couple hundred colleges. But in terms of having to come to the table, some would rather come to the table than make really difficult financial decisions, while others may say that our autonomy as an institution is more important and would rather fight it in court and try to cut our budget than try to get a payment from the administration. And then the Trump administration, on the other hand, is likely to up the ante. If you don't settle, they are going to try to get a higher price out of you and try to freeze every source of federal funding that they can find, potentially up to and including financial aid for students.
Yeah, yeah. And in fact, that is what may be happening with Harvard, because the number that was bandied about for a while was $500 million. That was reported in the New York Times. But then Harvard denied that that was the number and said it was a White House leak. But that's 10 times more than what Brown settled for. So that's an example of that kind of hardball that the administration is waging.
Yeah, and it's 2.5 times more than Columbia as well. But it's clear the administration really wants Harvard, in part because Harvard is the name Harvard, and also Harvard has shown that they're willing to fight back to at least some extent. And that's not the behavior the Trump administration wants. They want institutions to roll over, and they seem very willing to increase the price for not complying.
Do we have any idea what the Trump administration is going to do with the money that it's collecting from these institutions?
That is a great question. We have absolutely no idea of where the money is going. The president has talked about wanting to redirect money from Harvard to trade schools. So I'm not expecting a big boost to community colleges, but that's what the administration has said. I think it's going to go to some other mysterious project. Maybe it helps pay for Air Force One instead of pulling it out of nuclear weapons. That essentially a slush fund of this kind is rather unusual, and we're not sure what's going to happen with it.
Right, right. And we no longer have a Department of Education to administer said slush fund. So that complicates things even more, it seems. But I do wonder if the money is actually the point, because the University of Pennsylvania, another Ivy, was one of the very first to settle. And there wasn't actually any money involved in that when it agreed to ban transgender athletes. But I don't think there was a dollar figure involved. So I'm wondering if it is about a lot more than the money. Brown and Columbia have both agreed to some pretty strict restrictions on various operational issues at their universities that have nothing to do with the finances.
Yeah, for Brown, they're settling by paying workforce development nonprofits $50 million over 10 years. The White House isn't getting anything, but they're getting some control over institutional operations. And for Columbia, there's a provision in there saying that Columbia will work to enroll fewer international students. So Columbia got hit with both a financial penalty and some substantial restrictions on operations, even though Columbia is trying to spin it as we keep our autonomy.
What's happening with all of this makes me think that the relationship between higher education and the federal government is changing in perhaps irreparable ways. And you actually had a recent post on your website pointing out that the job of the university president is now very much a political appointment. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and where you see that higher ed government relationship going in the future.
We had a delightful era since roughly World War II where higher education was relatively apolitical and enjoyed a fair amount of support across the political aisle. Now we're seeing higher ed used more as a partisan tool, or in some cases, such as in Florida, a spoils system where this is the retirement home for former politicians, which has happened to some extent in the past, but now we're seeing it even more. And for Republicans, they saw that the congressional hearings against the Ivy League presidents a couple years ago were massively successful with respect to their base and also bringing in some independents. And that means they're going to continue going after higher education. And now, in a number of conservative states, the state governor or attorney general is teaming up with the Trump administration to try to make significant policy changes, such as ending in-state tuition for undocumented students, or even trying to throw out university presidents, as successfully happened at the University of Virginia. And we're just in an era where I think red state and blue state higher education is decoupling pretty quickly. And I also really wonder who in the world would want a job as a university president right now, at least at a place with any type of national profile. It's not going to be the traditional academic, because it's not the kind of work that we want to do, and it's not the kind of oversight that we want to have. It's just a brutal job.
And I just saw reported as well that Columbia and Brown have agreed to share admissions data, especially regarding race, with the administration as well. So that seems like another layer of control that presidents are going to have to deal with at some point in time. And that's a pretty significant step, to have the federal government controlling not only your finances, but your admissions and your curriculum and who makes up your student body from overseas. What are universities becoming under Trump?
Well, I think the bigger development recently was there's a memo from the Department of Justice last week that said we basically cannot use race or any proxy whatsoever for race in admissions, including things like a top 10% plan that Texas has and a number of other states in the South have, where the goal is you admit the top 10% of graduates from any high school in the state. And part of it's geographic diversity. Part of it was probably racial diversity too, but it helps inner city and the far rural areas as well. Even that sort of thing is under scrutiny right now. And the ability of colleges to shape an incoming class is going away quickly. You can basically admit everyone, or you use standardized test scores, which have some benefits, but also have a range of problems. But that is what the Department of Justice is saying is okay. And they're trying to get rid of anything remotely related to diversity in hiring, to the point where, as universities are coming fully back in the fall right now, there are a lot of quiet conversations happening about here's what we can and cannot do, and you better not write any of this stuff down, because people are going to be searching through your emails for open records.
Yeah, that's really discouraging. And what you say about the top 10% plans is really disturbing as well. We had Richard Kallenberg on this show in the past, and he's a big proponent of top 10% plans and other quote unquote race neutral means of using class as a way to get diversity in schools. But it looks like if those plans are under scrutiny as well, the Ivy League is going to look like what it looked like 100 years ago, right? Where you really had a very homogenous population of, I don't know, all the things that we've tried very hard to change over the last century, it seems. But it remains to be seen what actually happens.
Yeah, and part of what's driving some of these investigations as well is personal grudges by a number of key administration officials. One of the reasons why Duke is in the crosshairs over something in their student law journal is Stephen Miller went to Duke, and he's got connections there, and he's not happy with the way things are going. Part of the reason why Trump has been focused on the Ivy League is that's where he got his education. And then we see complaints against seemingly random institutions that come in. It's because someone knows somebody who made a complaint, or they saw a complaint come up on TV. And then that's how they're choosing to investigate some institutions. It's just whatever gets on their radar, they're going there first.
And so, what do you think Trump's end game is on all of this? Is there anything that's going to make him happy, short of the utter destruction of American higher education? Does he have a vision for what he wants, you think? Or is it really just about the retribution?
And at this point, the goal seems to be to make higher ed fully under him in a way that the federal government historically has not done, because we've had decentralized higher education, and we've been very proud of things like academic freedom, religious freedom in higher education institutions. But under the Trump administration, the focus is bringing elite higher education to heel. And I think the only way that really changes is if that suddenly becomes politically unpopular. And if you're attacking the Ivies, it's difficult for the average member of the public to sympathize as much. But if it starts going broader than that into a lot of the big state universities, then that may be where you start seeing more pushback. And we've even seen with the congressional hearings, as they kind of ran out of Ivy League presidents and started going elsewhere, public attention to those hearings has pretty much fizzled out. And for someone who really wants to control that news cycle, the goal is to try to hit right now, especially when the administration is desperately trying to change the national attention from the Jeffrey Epstein scandal.
Right. Well, I have one final question for you, Robert, and that is any advice you might have for university presidents who may be out there, who may not be in the crosshairs right now. Is there anything that you would recommend that they do in order to A, prepare for what could be coming down the pike, or B, to act defensively just in case?
The first piece of advice is assume you will be in the crosshairs at some point, whether it's just directly from an investigation is because you have money, or there's some student complaint, or someone's videotaping a class and professor says something and that gets on Fox News. So plan for being in the public eye. What is your strategy to try to respond? And does that strategy have any chance of success? So if you're at a red state public university and the administration decides to come after you, the state's probably also going to join in. And that's where my advice to institutional leadership is try to get a really good severance package. And I hate to say it that way, but it is very difficult for leaders to survive in this type of situation when there have been numerous successes in getting rid of leadership.
Thank you, Robert. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And hopefully the next time we talk to you, there will be some more positive news. In fact, I know that there will be, because the next time we talk to you will be probably after the release of the 2025 Washington Monthly College Guide and Rankings, the 20th anniversary edition of the rankings, which you put together. So we're excited to talk to you about that. And I think there will be some great news for some universities and colleges that don't get to shine in the public eye all that often, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's good to highlight the good work that a lot of American higher education is doing. And personally, I'll be in a good mood because then I'll have students back on campus and just get to really enjoy just the joys of working with people who are a lot smarter than me.
Well, sounds great. Well, thank you so much, Robert. Take care and talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
This week's podcast is sponsored by Montclair State University. Located just 12 miles from New York City, Montclair State University is a public research university that's helping students get from where they are now to where they want to be. Nationally ranked for social mobility and Washington Monthly's #1 public institution in New Jersey, Montclair is the state's premier public service institution. Learn more about what makes Montclair a university on the rise at montclair.edu. That's it for this week from the Washington Monthly. I'm Ann Kim, and on behalf of my co-host, Garrett Epps, thank you for listening. If you like what you heard, don't forget to subscribe to our channel or wherever you get your podcasts. Have a wonderful week.